Greetings. I'm Brother Judah from the Congregation of Israel, a representative of the NMP, the Nazarene Messianic Party. And I'd like to greet you all who have taken the time out to come to our session today. Oh, bear with me a moment. And we are going to continue to look into the worship of the gods. In one sense, they're called Baalim. And in another culture, they're called Baal. Baal is the singular of Baalim. But in another culture, not only do we have Baal, but we also have the Annunaki and the Igigi. Bear with me for 1 second. Let me just check something real quick here. Okay. So we're going to investigate this a little bit more. We have talked about it briefly in our introduction to this here. Mesopotamia or Sumer, the culture of Sumer, Mesopotamia. And we had to give somewhat of a background. And so I want to go a little further with this today. We gave a background of the ancient cultures personifying nature and also turning their kings into heroes. That's what we're going to investigate even more so today. Because we're arguing that religion, as we had said before, is a system of beliefs. And commonly when people think of religion, they think of Judaism, so-called Christianity, Islam, Buddhism. That's what people normally think of. And normally they don't really think of capitalism as a religion. But capitalism has its own ideology and laws and rules and dogmas. Feudalism, the same thing. Imperialism, the same thing. And we have people who adhere to these beliefs to bring about these type of social systems. According to the Western thought, when we think of antiquity and religion, we think of people bowing down to statues, practicing all sorts of superstition. But I would like to show you today that actually these people in antiquity wasn't ignorant. In fact, they were arguably, you can say that they were actually more advanced than the civilizations in which you have today. We took our time to go into the book of Genesis. And when we went into the book of Genesis, we identified an individual named Nimrod. And I attempted to argue that Nimrod was the beginning of a list of kings of Sumer who rebelled against the way of the Creator, the way in which leads to righteousness. Many people argue that they teach the way of righteousness. Many different religions in the context of Buddhism, so-called Christianity, Judaism. But when we're talking about righteousness, because we approach the Bible from a social political perspective, we're talking about the administration of justice. And since we approach the Bible from a social political perspective, and we argue that it's the proper way to approach the Bible because the Bible deals with kings, nations, governments, societies, empires. That's all politics. And when we're looking at politics, we are forced to look into political economy. And some people don't think that the Bible deals with political economy. The, the fundamental truths of the Bible, its fundamental truths, is tied directly into, it cannot be separated from political economy. So I want us to take our time and just consider a few things, if you will. Again, I'm Brother Judah from the Congregation of Israel, a representative of the NMP, the Nazarene Messianic Party, the Biblical School of Global Liberation for all oppressed people. And this is what we want to present to you today, that the worship of the gods of Babylon, which essentially were the worship of the gods of Canaan and Egypt, these gods and the worship of these gods, it carries on to this day. And we argue, in order for the people to truly to repent, it is necessary for the people to understand the depths of Satan, because you could be participating or doing things and have a certain psychology that is totally contrary to the biblical narrative. So let's go into the history and begin to understand what was happening in history and what is happening with us today. All right. So what we did analyze was the Tower of Babel. So in Genesis chapter 11, it spoke of the sons of man going forth to build a city and a tower. And they went forth to build a city and a tower in the plains of the land of Shinar, the region where Nimrod began to build his empire. Keep that in mind, because again, we argue that I am presenting an argument that it would be a mistake to understand Nimrod exclusively as the one son of Ham. That's where it started, with Ham's son. But Nimrod itself, the rebel king, it can be applied to a series of kings in Sumer who began to develop their civilization. Thus, Micah calls this area the land of the rebels, or the land of Nimrod. Now, in Genesis, I'm not going to read the entire thing. You can go back to our last segment. But in Genesis 10, verse 8, it says, and Cush begot Nimrod, and he began to be a mighty one in the earth. He began to be a mighty one and a mighty hunter. We have other discussions on that as well, which is very interesting. There's, historically speaking and politically speaking, or should I say the development of society in the context of the warrior hunter, also ties into the biblical narrative. So there's a lot to be learned here, but I'm not going to look at the hunter's aspect at this moment. But I do want us to focus on the point that Nimrod began to be a mighty one, a Gabar, a mighty one in the earth. And verse 10 says, in the beginning of his kingdom, the beginning was Babel and Erech and Akkad, Kelna, in the land of Shinar. Out of that land went forth Asher. Out of the land of Shinar come forth Asher, which is Assyria, and builded Nineveh and the cities of Rehoboth and Calne. So the Nimrod began to erect these cities, the beginning of his kingdom was Babel. And all of these other cities, which later on was identified as city states, they were unified under this empire, which was called Babel, which actually means the gate of the gods. But we're not talking about mystical creatures, aliens. We're going to show you that we're actually talking about human beings who have acquired a certain amount of power. And the gate is synonymous with city. So it's the city of the gods. And some of these gods are either called Baal, some of these gods are called Anunnaki, some of these gods are called Igigi, Ashtoreth, Isis, Osiris, thus and such, thus and such. They had many names for different attributes. If you carry certain attributes, they may call you one of these gods. Those of you who are familiar with the book of Acts, when Saul and Barnabas was teaching in Greece in the Greco-Roman Empire, they called Paul Hermes and they called Barnabas Zeus, because of the knowledges in which they were bringing out. They called Paul Hermes, probably because of the miracles which they were performing. They gave the name Zeus to Barnabas, but it was different attributes, or which they would understand as powers, in which these men had. They called him Zeus. In the ancient tongue of Sumer, he would have been called Anu. Okay. Now, the mixture of nature should be understood from the sense of the deification of nature. And these attributes are being given to men, shows the unity with certain men and nature. And this idea of the power of certain men given to them by the gods. All right, so you have these different names. Right now, we're going to look at the Anunnaki and the Igigi as we begin to investigate this empire that began to be erected in the lands of Shinar. So we see all of these lands coming together: Babel, Erech, Calneh, Akkad, and then Nimrod went forth, or it says went forth Asher, or some texts will read he went forth from Asher and builded Nineveh, Rehoboth, and Calneh. So we've got all these different cities, and they're going to be city states, but they're going to be united under one emperor. So when we're looking at the uniting of a one emperor, what we are investigating at this moment in time is post-flood imperialism. And what holds imperialism together are doctrines and dogmas and ideologies. You must convince the masses and convince the people to carry on such an enterprise. The people who carry on this enterprise, which have been taught to them by the rulers and the leaders, this is, according to the definition of the word, religion. If you let the ruling class and the people who sit in the seats of authority tell you that religion is separate from the government or the state, it's a blatant lie. You could never separate them. They're always inextricably connected, because religion is just a system of beliefs in which the people are bound by and hold to. And it may sound strange because we're not taught that normally. Absolute ownership of the land. That is a dogma or an ideology which is enforced by governments. But that is a pagan ideology. It is actually a pagan dogma, a doctrine of devils. Yes, absolute ownership of land. a doctrine of devils. So what we have to do is begin to go beyond the doctrines in which was delivered unto us by the aristocratic West. And we must approach the Bible and history from a different perspective in which was given to us. Now, we look at the Tower of Babel. We see that the beginning of its kingdom was Babel in Genesis chapter 10. We go to Genesis chapter 11, what we find coming forth out of Nimrod. After they begin the journey from the east to this plain of Shinar, Genesis 11 is going to get a little bit more involved in what was happening. Verse 4 of Genesis 11, and they said, go to, let us build us a city and a tower. As we explained before, this building of a city is the foundations of empire and civilization. This is where civilization comes from. Its root, city. So we find that they're going to build a civilization, a city. And these cities were being built, namely Nineveh, Ashur, Kelna, Babel, Rehoboth, Erech, Akkad. Now you see the development of civilization, the development of cities. Now, what begins to take place is that, all right, the city in itself, what is it? What type of city? So we normally think of cities, and we've been trained because the only world that we are used to are cities engaging in commerce and trafficking. Well, Babylon itself, according to the prophets, is the city of trafficking. Canaan, which also is under the influence of Babylon, the name Canaan is synonymous with merchant. But this is all we've been ever taught. This is what we have been bred to do. This is what we have been deceived into. And so now, for many people, any other world outside of a world of mercantilism, outside of the religion of mercantilism and social stratification, it's a world that don't exist because they don't know of it. But we're here to tell you the Bible teaches it, and we're here to tell you that there is a world other than what have been given unto us. The possibilities, I should say, of building a world other than what's been delivered unto us. But it takes a change of mind. It takes a change of direction. It takes a revolution, AKA, it takes repentance. To repent from the religion of the Gentiles, to stop serving the gods of the Gentiles, which is diametrically opposed to development of the kingdom of God and the worship of the only true and living Elohim. We use these words, the worship of the true and living Elohim. But now we have to find out what each person means. You probably listen to other teachers who probably have said the same thing. But let's see if we mean the same thing. The building of Babel in the plain of Shinar, they built a tower. The purpose of the tower was to reach unto heaven. And that's another discussion that is a very important to have. What is heaven exactly? What is the root of it? What did they mean 4,000 years ago when they was talking about heaven? It's probably not what you think today. If you just go back 2,000 years ago, the Hebrew Messiah, Yeshua ben David, was speaking to a Pharisee named Nicodemus. He told Nicodemus, no man has ascended to heaven, but he who have come down from heaven, even the Son of Man, which is in heaven. You said you have come down from heaven, but now you're testifying that you're still in heaven. Now, we can imagine him coming down out of the sky and out of the clouds, but is that what he meant? And when he told Nicodemus that he was presently in heaven, what did he mean? And our present understanding, in the way we have been taught in the West, of what heaven is as a place, we can run into perplexities trying to explain. But there's an explanation to understand what the ancients understood by heaven. But we're not going to go into that at this moment. But they wanted to build a tower to heaven, up to heaven, whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make a name, lest we be scattered abroad through the face of the earth. Now, what is the tower and the city? They working together. A very interesting write-up from that article that I was reading, speaking of towers. It says a society's tower is its total accumulated wealth in both material sense and in a science of technological sense. Its total library of wisdom and skills. The tower is a total accumulated wealth in both material and in science and technological sense. Your intellectual wealth, your gold and silver, it will all be accumulated in the towers. How? That's where your scientists will be, aka priests. That's where your kings will be. That's where your nobles will be. That's where the educated class, your scribes will be. The people will bring their wealth to the temple, to the tower. That's where you will store the grain, and that's where the leaders of the governors will dwell. So it will be this accumulated wealth of material wealth and also their science and technological sense. It says here a total library of wisdom and skills. It's centralization and infrastructure. So all what makes up the society and what makes it run, the wealth of the society, the wise men of the society, they are in association with the tower. That's where they will be, in the tower or the citadel. So when you're looking at the tower, sometimes synonymous with mountains, and that's where you place your temples and palaces. This is the idea behind the tower or the Temple Mounts. The library of wisdom and skill. Now, all these cities were to be drawn to the tower. All these cities were to make up one city. Because the city isn't necessarily a geographical place, but a city is a place of networks and industry and trade and commerce. As I said before, you lose that, you lose the city. So what we find here is the growth of civilization. It just so happened that the growth of this civilization is being led by rebels. They have rebelled against the natural order. And let's find out a little bit more what that means. It says here in this article, quite literally, a city's tower is that what ties societies together. The Greek word for tower, as used in the New Testament, is pergos, literally meaning fireplace or lighthouse, a structure specifically designed to burn a beacon or a sign, to burn a fire in and to guide people toward it. The tower or a mountain. You search enough, you actually find out that's what actually towers being built was signifying, mountains. And it's similar to the word of the Creator, where in Isaiah, the mountain of the Lord's house will be established in the top of the mountains. It's going to stand high like a tower. And it says, all nations shall flow unto it. Well, this is what they wanted to do in Babel. This is what Nimrod has set out to do. These structures would in time evolve into temples or tribal totems. Central banks in which societies stored their collective surplus, and ultimately centralized government. So towers represents centralized governments. Mountains, aka, is synonymous with the towers. A tower is just a mountain built with men's hands. And that's where the temples sit. That's where the house of God sits. That's where the wisdom lies. That's where all men come to. This is what draws the people together. All your wealth there. So it's like a central bank. And actually the banking system today actually comes from Babel and Sumer. And I didn't learn this out of a religious book. I learned this from reading economist history on the origins of the banks. And they argue, no doubt, that they actually come, they're actually progenitors, or should I say they actually come from Babylonian temples, according to their wording. Let us build the tower. Out of this tower shall go forth the worship of the gods of Babylon. We must identify the gods of Babylon and show you, just as later on in Egypt, it was Osiris and the rest of the priests and pharaohs. They were Baal. The Igigi and Annunaki are also Baal. Merodach, or which is Marduk, is Baal. It just simply means lords. Lords who they themselves, the ruling class, had argued in antiquity, these lords have right to the resources and the phenomenon of nature. It belongs to them. Natural law put them in place, and all what nature produces, they are in charge of it. Let's look at this. But now, see, they built this tower. Centralized infrastructure. A place in which they want people to be drawn to. The Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel. It was established in the land of Shinar. The land of Shinar is the land of Sumer. Okay? And in our journey, let's find out what Sumer means. This is out of World History Encyclopedia. World History Encyclopedia. It reads, the Sumerians were a people of southern Mesopotamia. This is right there in the area of the estuaries, in which we talked about in the last discussion. The land between the two rivers. Sumerians were the people of southern Mesopotamia, whose civilization flourished between 4000 BC and 1700 BC. Their name comes from the region, which is frequently and incorrectly referred to as a country. Sumer was never a cohesive political entity. That's not true. But again, this is a secular writing. In the beginning, it was cohesive until the rebellion. We know it was cohesive because they all had one language. After the rebellion, the language was divided. And the city-states also became initially divided. So they're picking it up here from Sumer as it was divided. They're arguing, as far as they go back in the secular history, Sumer after the confusion of the languages, after the division of the tongues. All right. Now, after that happened, they was not a cohesive political entity. So Sumer was never a cohesive political entity. However, but a region of city-states, each with its own king. All right. Now, this is what happened after the division. The Bible describes this. All societies at one time started in a primitive communal society. That's why in Romans, Saul argues that at one time the Gentiles knew God. They did. But it just depends on what that means to many people. There was a time in early society in which all started from a communal order, in which there was no differentiation in classes. There was no gender inequality. There was no social inequality. People lived in equitable, reciprocal, close-knit communities. And this was the society after the flood. This was the society in an early society of Adam. This was the society after the flood with Noah, and eventually broke apart. There was another religion introduced, another way of thinking, new ideals introduced. Now, notice this about Sumer. They all developed their own king. And in this process, we're going to find that because to say that they all divided tongues overnight isn't practical. The Bible don't tell you how long the process took. Okay? So let's be realistic and scientific. Let's look at this according to knowledge. As I said before, among the early society of Sumer, the creator confounded their language. They began to have different ideals, ideological differences. But at first, what was happening is that empire was being built. Cities were being established, and they were all on one accord. They all were on one accord until they began to have a difference in ideology, and they began to separate to the point they were even at war with each other. So now the central tower ceased being built because everyone went to their own. And what you began to find is temples and towers being built, not one temple or tower, but you have a series of them built in each respective land or territory. Whether it's been in America, Asia, wherever civilization began to develop, normally you will find the erection of a tower or a ziggurat. All right, because of the division. And we talked briefly last session about the division, but I want to talk to you about Sumer. Sumer was the southern counterpart of the northern region of Akkad, whose people gave Sumer its name. These people gave Sumer its name, meaning, and I had to put this one up on the screen for you. What does Sumer mean? Land of the civilized kings. According to this document in World History Encyclopedia, Sumer means land of the civilized kings. I told you civilization was being built in Shinar, aka Sumer. It was being constructed under Nimrod, and I said there was a series of kings that continued this pattern of Nimrod. But the erection of a city and a tower signifies civilization. And now when we're looking at the civilization, we're looking at the establishing, according to the ancient Sumerians, of lands of civilized kings. Kings bringing in to our attention social hierarchy. There's a doctrine that must establish this type of society. This doctrine that will establish this type of society is religious. It's religion. So that's what we have. We look at Sumer, the northern region of Akkad, and this was one of the lands of Nimrod, which he went to erect. And we find that Nimrod went forth to establish these empires, Akkad, Erech, Calneh, in the land of Shinar. From that land, he went forth into Assyria. This is out of the Berean Bible. From that land, he went forth to establish Assyria, where he built Nineveh, Rehoboth, and Calneh. Now, let's continue to investigate this. The land of the civilized kings. The Sumerians themselves referred to their region simply as the land, or the land of the black-headed people. And I've seen this used a couple of times. Some is making reference to the Cushites, the Ethiopians, which were blacks people, or some documents identify the laborers as the black-headed ones. And this is in the myths, in the Akkadian myths, which we're going to look at shortly. But we want to establish first the building of civilization. The idea of the tower in the city is to build a civilization. To persuade men to do this takes an ideology, it takes a doctrine. In order for them to follow through with it and to hold to it, they are being held together by a system of beliefs. We're showing you this is the true essence of religion. It takes a religion to build civilization. The Sumerians were responsible for many of the most important innovations, inventions, and concepts taken for granted in the present day. They essentially invented time by dividing day and night into 12-hour periods, hours into 60 minutes, and minutes into 60 seconds. Their other innovations and inventions include the first schools. So remember, this idea of a tower, the centralization of wealth, the centralization of knowledges, the centralization of science. We're looking at the birth of this type of civilization, but this civilization is in rebellion. This is the serpent seed. They are in rebellion to the initial natural order of things, which Adam initially was sent to establish, and which Noah, the man of justice, was sent to establish. They are rebelling against this, and it's very simple. God had made man to have dominion over the earth, as I said before. But now to us, it's commonplace. And we think it's according to nature for man to have dominion over man. That type of doctrine will be broken and shattered, because if you follow this all the way down to Revelation, Now, instead of the scattering of the people, we have the bringing together of the people, forming the temple of God, which is built in the top of the mountains. His mountain, his tower being built. The people are the building blocks. And these people, according to Revelation, they have autonomy. The nation is actually called a nation of kings and priests, showing that each person have autonomy. If you're all kings and priests, no man have dominion over the other man. Totally different than the religion of Nimrod. Totally different than the teachings of the gods of Babylon, which we're going to find the other names for Baal or Baal is simply Igigi and Annunaki or Annunaki. So we see Sumer, the land of the civilized kings, and their innovations and inventions, the first schools, the earliest version of the tale of the Great Flood. See, here they calling it a tale, but it's not a tale. What we're learning is that Sumer, now we can place them. We can place them somewhere in time. We know that Sumer is erected after the flood. They're not the civilization before the flood, but they're the civilization after the flood. They experienced it. And they say here, Sumer present also other biblical narratives, the oldest heroic epic. What else do Sumer present? Governmental bureaucracy, monumental architecture, irrigation techniques. So we see the birth of civilization from the black-headed ones, or the land of civilized kings. Now, when we're looking at the land of civilized kings, who dwelt in Sumer, the land of the civilized kings? The Annunaki and the Igigi. Now, if we're looking at the Annunaki and the Igigi, let's again, if you will, let's find out who they are. Okay, let's get an idea on who they are. Now, Anunnaki, Britannica.com. If Sumer is the land of the civilized kings, Anunnaki will probably have a name closely in association. Let's not get involved in extreme literalism when we're looking at hyperboles. We're looking at exaggerations. We're looking at anthropomorphism, right? That's why when we're looking at the kings, they got horns on their crowns, wings. Here, for example, we see the two horns on the crowns. We see the wings for swiftness, pomegranates and tree leaves for life, horns for power. So what we have to realize and learn is their language. Who is the Anunnaki who dwelt in the land of the civilized kings? It says Sumerian inscription from the temple of Nippur. Anunnaki, also called Anua, Anunnaki, also spelled Anunaki, Anunnaki, or Annunaki, or Anunnaku, class of gods. If we're looking at the ancient Semitic language, gods, Elohim means powers, a class of powers. So in the book of Exodus, it says, "Thou shalt not revile the gods." Gods just simply means powers. The creator sit and he judges among the congregation of the gods. He's not talking about no superhuman beings. He's talking about people who possess power. How do I know that? Because Abraham in the book of Genesis was called Elohim. And we could show this to Abraham. Yes, Abraham. So we're looking at a class of gods. We're not looking at superhuman people per se. We're not looking at aliens, a class of gods within the ancient Mesopotamian pantheon. The precise meaning of the term, even though they say it's ill-defined among some, but it says the precise meaning of the term princely seed in Sumerian remains ill-defined. But the term Anunnaki, people have deduced that it means princely seed. The princely seed in the land of Sumer. Sumer is the land of civilized kings. So we can see how the Anunnaki will find its place, the princely seed among the civilized kings. We're still not talking about aliens. That's the Anunnaki, the Igigi, or the Igiju. The term Igiju or Igigi is first attested in the text from the old Babylonian period. And this is out of museum.upn.ed. I think it's the University of Penn State. .ed, ancient Mesopotamian gods and goddesses. So the Igiju or the Igigi is first attested in texts from the old Babylonian period and only occurs in Akkadian context. A Sumerian logographic equivalent of the term Igiju is Nun-Galini. Nun-Galini, to be translated as the great princes or sovereigns. Sumeria, the land of the civilized kings. Igigi, which is a term from Nun-Galini, which is translated as the great princes or sovereigns, as is the Anunnaki, the princely seed. So what we're looking at with the Igigi and Anunnaki, we're looking at a class of rulers who have dominion. Thus, they have power, and they're actually called El or Baal, ruler, the one to have dominion over. Thus, we get El, gods. Not aliens, not superhuman beings, but their intelligence level according to the intelligence of the West. Like I say, the West, I remember reading an account out of the text Stolen Legacy. And out of this text of Stolen Legacy, it talks about how the Egyptians looked at the Greeks and whom they were teaching. And I remember reading an excerpt that said some of the Egyptian teachers and sages said that the Greeks are always children. They sort of criticized the Greeks' level of intelligence. They called them children. The civilization we have and see today, as complex as it may appear to be, arguably, it is still inferior to the civilizations of old. So these men did have intelligence, and the workers and the people who labored for them, highly skilled and intelligent. See, that's why they say they were aliens, is because the Greco-Roman culture want people to believe that they are the epitome of intelligence and skill and science, but they're not. Their science is inferior. And since it's inferior, when they look at the antiquity and their skill in building and knowledges and sciences and the infrastructures and even some of the mechanisms that they had created, light bulbs and electricities and pyramids being energy stations, it is difficult for them to come to the conclusion because they have taught the world that they are the epitome of knowledge. You leave it to the Western Greco-Roman world, they the first one people who built ships, navigating the seas. No, they was building ships way before the Greco-Roman culture even come into any type of development. Electricity, energy stations, batteries, all of these mechanisms were already in play before Greece and Rome. But because they say that they are the epitome of the sciences, if they find any type of architecture or work that precedes Rome and Greece, they come to the conclusion aliens had to build it. No, what no doggone aliens built it. It was just people with superior knowledges and skill. And that's difficult for them to accept because the people of superior knowledges and skill, those who argue that they were of the princely seed, those who argue that they were of the land of the civilized kings, those who argue that they were the great princes and sovereigns, they also, according to the World History Encyclopedia, also declared they're the land of the black-headed people. So there's a lot of reasons why this dogma of aliens and now the Anunnaki are aliens from another planet. That's where all of this nonsense come from, because of the people being built on lies. They're being built on lies. But the Anunnaki are arguably those of the princely seed. Though Anunnaki are those, or the Igigi are those of the sovereign kings in the land of the civilized kings, just like the Bible says. And out of the land of Shinar, a series of cities were being built. They were all being drawn together until he sent a difference in ideologies, and they had ideological differences, and the city-states broke up and all began to have their own kings. And this is what I mean here. When you're looking at the kings, you see the horns on his crown, how you have Gilgamesh embracing the lion as the hero, conquering the power of thought, the power of knowledges, the horns on the crowns. All of these mean something. These aren't aliens from another planet. This is the land of the civilized kings. But these civilized kings aren't to be glorified. They are to be studied to know what not to do. They are to be studied to know what to repent from, but they're not to be glorified in the sense that they are what we want to accomplish. Their governmental bureaucracy, their schools of thought have caused destruction upon the globe. But let's see and analyze a little bit more about these gods of the Babylonians, the Anunnaki, the Igigi, the Igiju, Baal. This is out of a text of Sumerians. Now notice carefully as we began to investigate what happened in the land of Shinar. Cush brought forth Nimrod. Nimrod began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter. His kingdom began in Babylon, Akkad, Erech, Calneh, in the land of Shinar or Sumer. Okay, so we see that first out of Cush came forth a man to unite or to bring together civilization, to make a tower and draw all men of the earth to this centralized form of government. And its tower was to be magnificent. It's a constant language used among the kings of the earth in their height of glory to build their establishment up to heaven. That's why when Nineveh was cast down, it was cast down from where? Heaven. When Babylon and was being destroyed in Isaiah, where was Babylon cast down? From heaven. Okay? I know we've been taught about it, but we got to learn the language. So they wanted to build a tower to heaven. The book of Job explained when a man increases in his riches and he increases in his pride, he says that his arrogance and his pride reaches up to heaven, which they shall be brought down low to the depths of hell. So they wanted to build an empire, reputable, that all the world will be drawn to it. Let us make a name for ourselves. Now, let's go into Sumer documents and see that these wasn't aliens. Nimrod is a title for rebel, which others continue in the land of Nimrod. But in Sumer, he probably had a different name. He probably had a different name. It says the first dynasty of Sumer, whose existence can be historically attested, at least to some extent, to the so-called first dynasty of Kish. Now, Kish, they didn't say it, but it's very similar to Cush, the first dynasty of Kish, which, according to the ancients themselves, follow immediately upon the subsidence of the flood. So the first dynasty of Kish, which follow immediately upon the subsidence of the flood. As the flood waters began, as they decreased, and men began to grow in this earth, there was a dynasty established. That dynasty, according to the Bible, was established under Cush. Here they saying Kish. That's what the Bible says. It was Cush, though, out of his son Nimrod. The first dynasty being established after the flood waters subsided. He began to be a mighty one in the earth, establishing a dynasty of Cush. But here it's saying Kish. Sumerians, page 43. In the course of the centuries that followed, Sumer reached new heights of political power and economic wealth, and witnessed some of its most significant achievements in the arts and crafts, in monumental architecture, in religious and ethical thought, in oral myth, epic, and hymn. Let's continue. The dynasty of Kish and Sumer rising in new heights, right? This idea of exalting itself up to heaven and political power. Only thing is that they could not be united. The Creator did not allow a united world establishment. He broke them up. But watch this. With that in thought, the biblical thought. The first ruler of Sumer, which is the dynasty of Kish, which the Bible called Cush, that's the first dynasty that rose after the flood, according to the Bible, Cush. But here they're saying it was Kish, the first ruler of Sumer, whose deeds are recorded, if only in the briefest kind of statement, is a king by the name of Etana of Kish, who may have come to the throne quite early in the 3rd millennium BC. So exclude the dates. Just look at the times. Dates are always skeptical. We see Etana of Cush, or a king named Etana who comes from Cush, or here Kish. the Bible, it was Nimrod, but Nimrod just simply means rebel. So we cannot say for certain that was actually his literal name. It could have been a surname. But whatever it was, in different cultures, he may pick up different names. Here they call Etana, son of Kish. In the king list, he, which is Etana, the first king of Kish, which began the first dynasty after the flood in the land of Sumer, in the land of the civilized kings. In the king list, he is described as, quote, he who stabilized all the lands. Is that what Nimrod was doing? He was drawing the people together because they had one language, one speech, so it was relatively easy to draw them all together, and he began to build these cities. Remember those cities? He began to build these cities, or to stabilize all the lands. Erech, Babylon, Akkad, Kelna, Assyria, Nineveh, Rehoboth, Kela, the king Etana, who you can call Etana, according to the definition, we can call Etana bear with me a moment. I don't want to go that far. We're going to get there briefly. Bear with me a second, please. We can call Etana the princely seat. We can call him Annunaki. He is literally an Annunaki, or Nimrod, or Etana could be non-Galene, which is translated from Igigi or Igigi, which means the great prince or the great sovereigns. So you can argue that Nimrod was the beginning of the Igigi or the Igigi or Annunaki, because in different myths, sometimes the Igigi are represented as the heavenly or the godly host, the celestial host, and the Annunaki as the terrestrial. It depends on what myth. So, okay, so sometimes the Igigi is represented as the celestial and Annunaki as the terrestrial, but nevertheless, they are identified as the gods or the great princes and sovereigns or of the princely seed. So Nimrod, Annunaki, or the Igigi. We're not looking at no one from another planet, though. I have to reiterate that. So back at this write-up, he, Etana, it is he who stabilized all the lands, the first king, the Igigi, the sovereign, okay? The one who stabilized all the lands. On the assumption that this statement found in a document dated a millennium or so later than the reign of Etana embodies a trustworthy tradition, it may be inferred that he held sway, Etana, not only over Sumer, but over some of the neighboring lands as well. Yeah. See, the beginning of his kingdom was Babel in the land of Sumer. But we also find that it was also in Genesis, this mighty one from Cush, but they're saying here Kish. So we are arguing, they're giving pretty much the same account, different names. The hint is Kish dynasty is the first dynasty after the flood. Waters begin to abate. Well, according to the Bible, that's Cush. And the first king of Cush is Nimrod, but they're calling him Etana, he who stabilized the lands. But the Bible is explaining that it was Nimrod who began to be a mighty one in the earth. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babylon, Akkad, Kelnah, in the land of Shinar, Nineveh, Rehoboth, Kelha. He began to stabilize the lands, and he held sway not only over Sumer, but over some of the neighboring lands as well. In short, Etna, in short, that he may have been man's first known empire builder. According to the Genesis chapter 11, the first empire builder was Nimrod, son of Cush. Here we have Eltana, or Etna of Cush, or Etna, son of Cush. Here it says Etna, son of Kish. And I want to do this again because I just want to get the numbers for some reason. Yes. Annunaki, princely seed. So you write this down. Igigi, the great princes and sovereigns. So all who come forth from Nimrod and all of the kings that come forth, they will be the great princes and sovereigns. Or the Annunaki, the princely seed. After the division, though, the city-states are going to have different ideologies. Sometimes the Anunnaki is going to have power. Sometimes the Igigi is going to have power. I'm going to show you what I mean here. But I want to establish right off the bat, brothers and sisters, there is no evidence showing when we look at this, there is no evidence showing we're talking about aliens. We're not talking about aliens. We talked about the king's list. He is Etna is the first empire builder, or of the princely sovereign. He's the first one of the Anunnaki, Nimrod, or Etna. That Etna was a notable and outstanding figure in the early history of Sumer. It's shown by the purely legendary note in the very name, or in the very same king's list, that he was a man who ascended to heaven. Remember, he wanted to build a tower to heaven? He was a man who ascended to heaven, to great heights, to great renowns. He, according to the Bible, began to be a mighty one in the earth. And we're saying that it is the religion of Nimrod and the establishing of the Igigi, or the land of the civilized kings. This is the religion that's destroying the world today. What do the Western powers claim they're bringing? Civilization. At the cost of what? The destruction of humanity, the enslaving of humanity, the hunting and enslaving of humanity. He ascended to heaven by a Semitic Akkadian poem current early in the second millennium BC that centers about this same mythical motif. All right. Let's go further. The king, let's get a briefing of the king's list. Etna. Then we have two after Etna. Enme Baragasi. Enme Baragasi. Then we have Meskiag Gasher, son of Utu, the Sumerian sun god. Meskiag Gasher was known as the son of the sun god. Etna was one who declared to ascend into the heavens. Now we're looking at hyperbole. We're looking at different descriptions of the power and prestige given to men. Now it says here in Etna, according to the king's list, the list of what? Remember what Sumer meant? Sumer, the land of civilized kings. So Etana, according to the king's list, is followed by 7 rulers, several of whom, to judge from their names, were Semites rather than Sumerians. The 8th was the king Enme Bar Regesi, about whom we do have some historical or at least saga-like information from both the king's list and other late Sumerian literary works. Watch this. Moreover, only very recently, a precious 3-word contemporary inscription, and this text I'm reading from is, I believe this one was in the 1970s or the 1920s. I think this was the 1970s, actually. So this is an old work I'm reading from. It says, moreover, only very recently, a precious 3-word contemporary inscription was discovered on a small fragment of an alabaster vase by a young Sumerologist working in Baghdad, which proves beyond doubt that he, Enmeg Baragesi, which would be the second on the king's list, proved beyond doubt that he was not at all a mythical king, but one of real flesh and blood. They were not aliens. They were real people. And these real people began to be worshiped as heroes. And these real people who began to be worshiped as heroes, they had a doctrine, a rebellious doctrine that rebelled against the social order of God. And one thing that we are seeing, which most people glorify, but what we're noticing in the land of civilized kings is the establishing of hierarchy, social stratification, ultimately which bring forth the caste system and the class system, where we're bringing in now the man having dominion over man, breaking the natural order of the Genesis, rebelling against the natural order of the Genesis. Genesis did not command that man should have dominion over man. He was to have dominion over the earth. That's what Genesis teach. Okay. Now we're going to go through a couple of more because I want to bring something home this evening. I don't want to leave this part out, but we're going to work our way down because I want to give you an account to show you. Thus far, we see that these whom we have before us, these kings, as it was been revealed with Etana, if he coincides with the son of Ham or the son of Cush, in our writing under the Sumerians, the son of Kish, they called him Kish, just as we see here with Enmeg Baragasi, it's a real flesh and blood man. They just embellished his reign. They embellished Etana's reign. Oh, he's the one who ascended to heaven. Here, after Enme Baragesi, we have Meskiag Gasher, which is the son of Utu, which is the Sumerian sun god. Okay. He's the one, I believe, who's the sovereign over Erech, Kelna. So when we look at Nimrod, we're looking at not just the person, but there were other kings, so-called civilized kings, who followed the pattern. Thus, they fell up under the reign of Nimrod. So when he said he went forth to build, because these kings are following and they're continuing the work of Nimrod. It doesn't tell you how long Nimrod lived, but it takes some time to erect and build cities. But if these kings are successors, not his sons per se, because they say Etana didn't have any children, but he has successors following and carrying on his way, his doctrine, then they can argue Nimrod went forth and built this city Akkad, Kelna, Nineveh. But it's a succession and it's a series of kings. Not aliens. Not aliens. And you need to understand, like I said before, why they tell you it's aliens. Because they want to make it seem like old civilization was just ignorant cave people. No, not at all. Electricity, power stations, architecture, science, math, building, just like they said with Sumer, laid its foundation in architecture and schools and building. Civilization, highly advanced. It's today, the people today who think they're wise and think they're smarter than the people of ancient days. You fooling yourself. You fooling yourself. That's why you can't rebuild. You can't build at all what they built. And for it to last 4 millennia. You can barely have a building last 200 years with modern architecture. These buildings and infrastructures have been lasting for the last 3, 4, 5 millennia or longer. So now you want to say aliens made it. And because you have begun to build off of lies, it's all crazy now. People talking about aliens and the Bible come from aliens. Brothers and sisters, please. That's not how it is. That's not how it is at all. You know, and just like we told you, they all these giants, and they lied on Enoch and saying Enoch done had this book that talked about giants, and they done messed that up too. And it got people running around here acting a fool. And now they waiting for some lizard people, for some people to come out of space and spaceships. The Anunnaki will return. And the Anunnaki never left the earth. We're still living under present Sumer. We're still living under Canaan. The merchants, Canaan, Sumer, the land of the civilized kings. The Anunnaki are none other than the ruling class. The Igigi are none other than the ruling class. They're the ones who are Baal, who have established dominion over. And it's this religion they have taught you isn't a religion. You don't even know you following a religion and building empire. Keeping the infrastructures of the world running, it is the teachings of the Anunnaki. It is the teachings of the so-called civilized kings that keep the people oppressed. And you sitting up here waiting for something else to happen, brothers and sisters. It's been going on. The messengers have sought, the messengers of the scriptures have taken the time. The Creator have sent his messages out for the people to be enlightened, to struggle against this madness. But I know you prefer to hear aliens come. And if that's what you prefer to hear, when you go find it. Because at the end of the day, what a person's looking for, that's what they're going to find. So here was some of the kings. King Etana. He was the first ruler of Sumer, whose deeds are recorded, if only in the briefest kind. That's what we had read, right? Etana is the Etana of Cush. And if this is Nimrod, the rebel, Etana, he is the son of Cush. Here they calling him Kish. He's known to have stabilized all the lands. The king, or the Anunnaki, the sovereign, one among the sovereign kings, which would be the Anunnaki, Etana, the other Anunnaki, Inmebaragesi. What is he known for? He's on the king list in Samaritan literary works. They found out that he was a real flesh and blood man. When we're looking at the next of the Anunnaki, which is a king or a ruler or a sovereign, Miskaya Gasher, described in the king's list as the son of Utu, the Sumerian sun god, founded an ambitious and powerful dynasty in the city of what? Erech. Genesis chapter 11. And his kingdom began in Babylon, Erech, Akkad, and Kelna. In Meskayagasha, he also was a sovereign who continued the work of Nimrod in Erech. He continued that same doctrine. He was ruler of a powerful dynasty in the city of Erech, which in his days was still known by the older name Anna, house of An, the heaven god. The Greeks called An Zeus. The Romans called Zeus and An Jupiter. Now we're looking at the personification of heaven. But out of heaven, the personification of heaven, come the king Etana, or we find Micaiah Gasher, or Messiah Gasher. And that's what we have, King Etana, or Etana. He have An in his name. He was the one to ascend into heaven, and this is An. So we're looking at embellishments. We're looking at hyperboles of real men, but they are the Anunnaki. According to Messiah Gasher, he entered the seas and ascended the mountains. He may have tried to extend his sway over the lands all around Sumer and far beyond. Then he brought forth the son, Aga, the son of, then another king, I'm sorry, didn't come from Messiah Gasher. This is Aga, the son of Enme Baragasi. These are the sovereigns of Sumer. Sumer, the land, what is that what we read? What does Sumer mean again? According to the World History Encyclopedia, land of the civilized kings. That's what we're reading about right now. The kings who brought civilization. After Aga, we have his son, Enmerkar. Enmerkar, son of Aga, who according to the king's list, follow him to the throne, but who in the epic poems is given the epithet son of Utu. He's also called the son of Utu, the sun god, the same as that given to his father in the king's list. He's called the son of God. He was certainly one of the outstanding figures of early Sumer, according to the king's list. He built the city of Erech. So what we find is the kings of Sumer building the lands in which the Bible said Nimrod was building. Then after that, we have Lugal Bana. He too must have been a venerable and impressive ruler. And it is not surprising to find that by 2400 BC, and perhaps even earlier, he had been deified by the Sumerian theologians and given a place in the Sumerian pantheon. Lugal Bana. Then we have, after him, we have Dumuzi, a ruler who became the major figure of the Sumerian holy marriage rite and dying god. This Dumuzi is argued is ultimately Tammuz. It says here he became the holy marriage rite, the dying god myth, which left a deep impression on the ancient world. In fact, the women of Jerusalem, to the horror of the prophet Ezekiel, were still lamenting his death in the 6th century BC. Ezekiel 8:14, you'll find this. Dumuzi is actually Tammuz. That's actually Tammuz. And this is the one I want to get to as we begin to narrow it down for the night session. Gilgamesh, a ruler whose deeds won him such wide renown that he became the supreme hero of the Sumerian myth and legend. we're reading about the Anunnaki and the Igigi, the Sumerian rulers. Sumeria, the land, or Sumer, the land of the civilized kings. Now, I want to show you something here before we go into Gilgamesh. A reminder, the city-states of Babylon and Uruk or Erech. There were many civilizations, and this is from Cities and Governments of Mesopotamia Civilization. An article, Cities and Governments of Mesopotamian Civilizations. There were many civilizations in Mesopotamia. The civilizations included our Sumer, Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian empires. Each empire was centered around a main city. The main cities of ancient Mesopotamia are shown in the map. Here is to the side, not above. Many Mesopotamian cities would be located areas where natural resources were abundant. Because the idea of the kings and the civilized kings was to seize upon the means of production. This is what we shared with you, seizing upon the means of production. An example of such a city placement would be Uruk, one of the first cities in Mesopotamia, or Erech. Okay, and that was one of the first cities that was being built, Erech. The beginning, his kingdom began in Babylon, Erech, and Akkad. So Uruk or Erech, one and the same. One of the first cities in Mesopotamia. It is located with nearby rivers and has fertile soil as well as I don't know how that got in there. I copied and pasted. As animals nearby to hunt from, as well as animals nearby to hunt from. The city of Uruk was surrounded by high walls and had many temples. It was a small, however, and extremely dense population at its height. Uruk was the first known Mesopotamian city and served as a model for many other cities. Babylon, a city of which not much of remains today, had a similar structure. Both cities had mud brick structures. It had large walls, but the difference in Babylon and Uruk was Babylon was a city built later in time and was the capital of an empire. So the empire of Babylon is not to be confused with the city of Babylon. Later on, all the land of Shinar, it is literally the empire of Babylon. But what we want to focus on is Uruk, one of the city-states in the land of Sumer, and Babylon, the city, as a city-state in Sumer. Why am I bringing this out? Because I want to show you something here. Another, in the same article, briefly, I want you also to bring back to remembrance, all of the governments of ancient Mesopotamia were centered around kings. Thus, we have the Anunnaki and the Igigi, or as the name itself represents, Sumer, land of civilized kings. We're talking about men who sit in seats of power. All of the governments of ancient Mesopotamia were centered around kings. They believed the kings were part God and were given the right to rule, like the mandate of heaven in China, the same language in China. All right. So I wanted to point out Uruk and the city of Uruk or Erech and the city of Babylon. The city of Babylon is older than the city of Babylon is older, or excuse me, Erech is older than the city of Babylon. One of the first cities being built was Erech in the empire of Babylon. Later on, the city of Babylon was built in the empire of Babylon. And this is what I want to bring out, the point I want to bring out. Now, we go back to our argument, Nimrod the rebel, the Anunnaki, and the Igigi. He will either be the sovereign or the seed of the sovereigns. So if you call Kish the sovereign, Nimrod in that sense will be the seed of the sovereign. Okay. But if you look at Nimrod as the beginning of the empire, then he would be the sovereign king. Now, Gilgamesh was on the king's list. Gilgamesh was one of the 8 on the king's list. Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, the king of the Mesopotamian city-state. Here are icons of Gilgamesh. He was known as a tyrant. Look what it says about Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is the semi-mythic king of Uruk, best known as the hero of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the great Babylonian poem that predates Homer, Iliad, and Odyssey by 1,500 years, and therefore stands as the oldest piece of epic world literature. Gilgamesh features in several Sumerian poems, but is world famous for the Mesopotamian epic. Historical evidence of Gilgamesh's existence is found in inscriptions crediting him with the building of the Great Walls of Uruk, modern-day Warqa or Iraq, which in the story are the tablets upon which he first records his quest for the meaning of life. He is also referred to in the Sumerian king's list. That's what we was reading. 8 of the king's list. Gilgamesh was the 8th we had read about, and is mentioned by known historical figures of his time, such as King Baragesi of Kish, besides the legends which grew up around his reign. This is worldhistory.org. So we have Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk. Who else do we have? Marduk. Remember, they're arguing Iraq was established first before the city of Babylon, not the empire, but the city of Babylon. The local god of the city of Iraq, they said, was Gilgamesh. Marduk, because the city of Babylon was built much later. Marduk, the chief god, or the Anunnaki. Wait a minute, I just want to read this to you again. Anunnaki, princely seed, or Igigi or Igiju, the great sovereigns or the great princes. So when we're looking at this here, when we're looking at the Marduk, he could be called Anunnaki or Igiju, the chief god of the city of Babylon. Marduk, a Mesopotamian religion, the chief god of the city of Babylon, and the national god of Babylonia. As such, he was eventually called simply Baal or Lord. And this is out of the New World Encyclopedia. Marduk, Sumerian for solar calf, biblical Merodach, was the name of the late generation god from ancient Mesopotamia, a patron deity of the city of Babylon. When Babylon became the political center of the Euphrates Valley, talking about the city of Babylon, in the time of Hammurabi, Marduk rose to the head of the Babylonian pantheon, a position he fully acquired by the second half of the second millennium BCE. He was also referred simply as Baal, meaning Lord, Baal Marduk, or Merodach. Now, before we close for tonight, I want to read something to you about out of the Akkadian myth. The Akkadian myth from the record of Merodach or Marduk. All right, so establishing or bringing out that these men, the kings of Sumer, the Anunnaki, literally, they're not aliens. They're not people from other planets. All of those teachings have been built from a lie. Simply a lie. And so what I would like to do, I want to go and deal with this Akkadian myth, or the Enuma Elish. The modern Enuma Elish, they sort of try to clean it up a little bit, but I have an older one, Akkadian Myths and Epics. And this is tablet 6. After the Anunnaki sought out, let me start in tablet 4. Tablet 4. It says, they erected for him a princely throne, facing his fathers. Speaking of Marduk, he sat down, presiding. Thou art the most honored of the great gods. Thy decree is unrivaled. Thy command is Anu. Anu is the heaven. In other words, your command is the command that comes forth from the heavens. Your command is a law from the heavens. This is what they're saying about Marduk. But Gilgamesh was before Marduk. But what we're finding is an embellishment of these men. But notice what the kings' doctrines and the doctrines and legends that come forth from these kings by the ruler class. They're saying that the command of Anu, or the command of Marduk, is unrivaled. Thou, Marduk, are the most honored of the great gods. Thy decree is unrivaled. Thy word is Anu. From this day unchangeable shall be thy pronouncements. So they're establishing that Marduk word is infallible, it's unchangeable. It comes from heaven. I want to move forward. Moving forward to now tablet 6. It says, when Marduk hears the words of the gods, his heart prompts him to fashion artful works. Now, we skipped over some because the gods started complaining because they didn't want to do no work. And they wanted Marduk to do something about it. So Marduk, remember, whose word is the word from heaven, it cannot be altered according to the Akkadian myths and epics. When Marduk hears, this is tablet 6, when Marduk hears the words of the gods, which are the Annunaki and the Igigi, or the sovereigns, or the princes, or the ruling class, his heart prompts him to fashion artful works. Opening his mouth, he addresses Ea to impart the plan he had conceived in his heart. Blood I will mass and cause bones to be. I will establish a savage. Look what he's saying. To impart the plan he had conceived in his heart, blood I will amass, or I will mass, and cause bones to be. I will establish a savage. Man shall be his name. Verily, savage man will I create. You see the adulteration? Genesis didn't call man a savage. Genesis said man was made in Elohim's image. Here in the myths, it's the gods or the ruling class. In their myth, they're making man. But man is a savage to them. Savage man I will create. He, savage man, shall be charged or commanded, because remember, Marduk's word cannot be altered. He shall be charged with the service of the gods, that they might be at ease. The ways of the gods I will artfully alter, though alike reverend, into two groups, they shall be divided. Ea answered him, speaking a word to him, giving him another plan for the relief of the gods. Let be one of their brothers be handed over. He alone shall perish, that mankind may be fashioned. And this was one of the gods, King do something like that. I forget his name. He was one of the gods that led the battle against Tiamat. We're not going to get into that at this moment, but they took one of the gods, sacrificed him, took portions of this god to fashion man. Savage man. The point I want you to pick up today is that the kings, the rulers, the Annunaki, the Igigi, they didn't want to work. So they told Marduk to form savage man or create savage man. For what reasons? To be charged with the service of the gods. Moving further down, out of his blood they fashioned mankind. He imposed the service and let free the gods. After Ea the wise had created mankind, had imposed upon it the service of the gods, that work was beyond comprehension. Ea is the manifestation of waters too. But it was the work of Ea Marduk. Anu represented the heavens. Marduk word had come from the heavens, establishing his authority. The ruling class of the princes, the kings, the princely seed, they sought to create savage man so the gods could be set free. And man, upon man, savage man will be imposed the service of the gods. That work was beyond comprehension, according to this writing. Same thing happens today. Savage man keeps them in ignorance, keeps people dumbed down. We are dumbed down and we continue to follow the religion of the ancients. Savage man only bred to accumulate wealth and comfort for the ruling class. Savage man. He is no good, he is no profit unless he is producing wealth for the princes, for the Igigi, for the Annunaki. He earned his right to live by service to the Annunaki. Savage man earned his right to live if he is productive to produce wealth and comfort for the ruling class. This is the religion that the ruling class don't want you to pay attention to. This is actually the religion or the system of beliefs that the God of heaven had caused Abraham to bring forth children to change what we're reading about now. That man is not a savage to serve the gods, where man having dominion over another, because these kings were none other than men who exercised dominion and oppressed others. Savage man was created. The Anunnaki, going back to tablet 6, the Anunnaki opened their mouths and said to Marduk, who are the Anunnaki? The sovereign princes. They opened their mouths and said to Marduk, their Lord, now, O Lord, thou who hast caused our deliverance, what shall be our homage to thee? Let us build a shrine whose name shall be called, lo, a chamber for our nightly rest. Let us repose in it. They said, let us build a shrine. You know who's going to build the shrine. Tablet 6 just told you who's going to build the shrine. Savage man. They're going to have savage man build the shrine that they can repose in it. Let us build a throne. Savage man going to build the throne. And recess. A recess for his abode. On that day that we arrive, we shall repose in it. When Marduk heard this, brightly glowed his features like the day. The command thus was, quote, construct Babylon, whose building you have requested. Remember, his word is from heaven. Construct Babylon, who? Savage man, who are charged for the service of the gods. Savage man, you build the city of commerce. You build the land of traffic. Savage man is to build the empires, while the Anunnaki or the princes or the civilized kings rest. Construct Babylon, whose building you have requested. Let its brickwork be fashioned. You shall name it the sanctuary or the gate of the gods. This is an excerpt out of the Akkadian myths. Marduk and Ea and the gods contrived to come together to strive to build a society that will be a shrine to them. It's to be called Babylon. Now, not just the city, but it shall grow into an empire. And it will be man who shall build it. And I read it in the last excerpt, and I want to read it again. And this is out of Babylonian and Assyrian religion. In Babylonian and Assyrian religion, on page 19, it says, the general pattern of culture did not change with the changing dynasties or the order of the civilized kings, the Anunnaki and the Igigi. While each city had its own guardian deity, Shamash at Sippar, Sin at Marduk at Babylon, the general plan of temple buildings, the organization of the priesthood, and the structure of society were practically the same throughout the whole of Sumer and Akkad. And what was the structure? The community was divided into 3 classes. So we're not looking at Marduk, who was deified, who represents heaven, but let's look at the classes, because they objectified Marduk. So the classes we will have, the community will divide into three classes. First came the Amilu, the aristocracy, composed of the kings, the nobles, the priesthood, government officials, and the regular soldiers. They can be under the Anunnaki or the Igigi. The second class consisted of merchants, farmers, artisans, other freemen of various occupations. These were known as the Mushkinu. The third class, in which the Akkadian myth called savage man. The third class, upon which the structure of society rested. Remember, the gods was to be at rest, and they was going to build or form or create savage man to do the service of the gods. The third class, upon which the structure of society rested as it did later in Greece and Rome, consisted of slaves, either of those who had been conquered in war, or those who had been purchased or become enslaved through debt or other causes. These classes were far from equal before the law, and the incidence of punishment differed considerably as between the classes. Inequality. Savage man with the third class in which everything was built. This entire infrastructure is rightfully called it's rightfully called a religion. This is the building of empire. It is the exact same structure today. As long as we think the religion of Nimrod is Christmas, and that the paganism just consists in Easter and holidays, then we will continue to perpetuate the evil. And we have been deceived, those of us who only believe in religions in whom the ruling class classified as religion. Buddhism, Judaism, Islam. And we fail to look at the religion that dominates the world, empire. The religion of Nimrod, the religion of Baal, the small group of men who call themselves civilized, we call them the 1% today, who have seized upon the natural resources and declare that their reign and their power, they receive it from God. They have told us to accept our lots, and only freedom that we have waiting for us is after we die. This, my friends, is a doctrine of devils, and they have told us to remain in our place, to do and obey their teachings, do their bidding, build their empires so they can have ease. And your reward will come when you die off in another quasar. Thus, they have created a deceived people who allow them to run roughshod over the earth and have drawn the people into the service which is contrary to God, which is causing destruction, suffering, all types of evils, injustice, and violence. But yet, we pray, we wait and pray for a chariot to come out of the sky. We wait and pray for a spaceship to come out of the sky. We're praying for a man literally to come on the clouds, or one day we will disappear. Who taught us to wait for that? Think about it. Where did we learn those concepts from? What made us even not not even consider that the language of Yeshua ben David saying, you shall see the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Why don't we ever even consider that it could be symbolism or apocalyptic imagery? Maybe people 2,000 years ago who heard him say that did not imagine someone coming out of the clouds literally. And when you read the prophets, you can build a decent case to show that's not what they literally waited for. Who told us that? The same people who follow in the religion of Nimrod and the gods. We attempted to show you thus far that the Anunnaki and the Igigi, they are not people from they are not beings from another planet. They are simply the kings that began to arise shortly after the flood and build the very first civilization in which Egypt patterned, and which Greece and Rome patterned, and all of the world have patterned themselves after the doctrines and dogmas of the very first civilization of Sumer that the Bible calls the Great Rebellion. We're going to close for today's session. And I appreciate the people who have at least taken their time out to listen to it. And hopefully it'll help bring clarity to our research and bring more of an understanding to the real life struggles in which we face on this earth. And again, part of this teaching, we want to begin, or we want to also introduce the altering, or at least a case built, that the teachings of the scriptures have been altered and have led the people to inaction. And we're going to look and see the way in which that they teach about the Hebrew Messiah, Yehoshua ben David. Are they teaching him according to scripture and knowledge? Or are they teaching him according to the doctrines of the ancients with the sentiments simply of hero worship? I'd like to say peace and blessings to the brothers and sisters who sincerely searching, and most high willing, we will come again with more discussions and hopefully bring clarity to those who are sincerely searching, so we can put our hands into the work of the ancestors, that it may be fulfilled. Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, and thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. With that, peace to you all who sincerely search in the most high willing. We will come again with a discussion and more teachings. Until next time, I'll say peace.